Okay, this is an introduction for the people who missed the workshop on coding or thematic analysis. It's part and parcel of the same thing. So this is a technique you can use for your dissertations if you're doing interviews. You can use it in other forms of things like discourse analysis and content analysis, but I don't think anyone's actually doing that. At least not no one I can think of off the top of my head are using those techniques. But quite a few of you are using interview techniques, so we'll stick to the interview examples. It's fairly straightforward, so we'll pick up on it as we go along. So what we'll look at today, or I say today in this podcast, whichever day you're watching it on, are how to transcribe your layouts, how to start coding your interviews if you haven't already begun on that, how to move from coding to thematic analysis, and how to create coding schedules and manuals, which you only need those for certain types of coding, not for everything. So, anyway, start with transcribing. When you're transcribing, you've conducted an interview with Joe Bloggs or whoever it may be, and first off, what you have to do, you may have recorded it, perhaps on a dictaphone or on your mobile phone or whatever technology you're using to record it. You've gone home, you've sat down, and you're typing up their answers. Now, when you're typing up their answers, you're meant to write word for word everything they say. So if they're umming and ahhing and dithering, you're meant to include the ums and the ahs and the dithers. If there's awkward silences, you normally do squared brackets with ... inside to indicate that there's been a pause for a period of time. If, as is often the case when people are talking, as compared to when they are writing, when they're talking, they often say things in a very repetitive way, like I'm just doing, or they say things in a very ungrammatical way. You know what they mean, but they're not putting words in a fluent Shakespearean style. They're all over the place. Even so, you're meant to record exactly what they say, even if it is all over the place. There's only certain conditions under which you might consider changing, or at least omitting what they say. First off, if they have broken the ethical bounds of anonymity. So obviously in an interview you're not meant to give the name of the person you're interviewing, nor are you meant to give any other names that might indicate who your interviewee is, or reveal things about the people being named that they would not want revealed. So if that person during the course of the interview has accidentally let slip a name of someone, then you might want to take the option of just putting XXX in squared brackets to indicate that a name has been said, but you are not including that name in the written transcript because of the issue of anonymity and not wanting to breach someone's anonymity. If they're talking about a well-known figure, they're mentioning their views on the Prime Minister or some footballer or actor or whatever, that's fine because they're public figures. But it's where they might have, let's say you're interviewing someone about their experiences at work and they've let slip the name of someone they work with, which would help to identify who the person you have interviewed is. That's the kind of occasion when you might put the XXX in to avoid giving away the identity of the people involved. The other occasion when you might want to consider a bit of small-scale censorship is if this individual has, perhaps unintentionally, said something that is slanderous about another person, usually in the process of naming them. It's slander when it's spoken. If you then write it up, put it in your dissertation and print it, when it moves from spoken word to written word, it becomes libel, which is a criminal act, and it's something that an individual could be hauled into court for having libeled someone. Now, even though it's your interview who said it, it is you who has typed it up and written it, so it could potentially be you who might face legal consequences if you repeat a false accusation. So if an accusation is made, you could simply do the XXX thing over the name of the person, or if you feel it's even still fairly obvious who this is, even with their name X'd out, you might choose to omit the entire sentence and just put a longer set of XXX's with a note to the reader that you have had to remove a section of the transcript because of legal reasons. You don't have to go into any detail about what those legal reasons are, just say this had to be omitted because of legal issues. Now on the screen you've got that box there at the bottom of the screen where there's an interview going on about people's experience of Crown Court and magistrates. Where it says I and R, that's the interviewer, and the respondent, the person answering the questions. So you could use I to represent yourself, the interviewer, and you could use R for respondent, or you could use S for subject to indicate where the answers are coming from the person you're talking to. And you'll see on the left-hand side of the page there are the numbers 38 down to 49. Now it's standard practice when you are including a transcript to number the transcript in that way. Some of you might have already done that, and some of you might not know how to do it. So if you don't know how to do it, go into Word, and on your bar at the top of your Word document you will find an icon called line numbers. Now different versions of Word put it in different places along the line, so it may not be on your version of Word in the exact same place that it is in the image on the screen here. But once you've found line numbers, click on it and you'll get that drop down box that you can see on the screen. The one you want is continuous. So that means if you've conducted, let's say, 5 interviews for argument's sake, the opening line of interviewee number 1, the very first interviewee A, will be the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that'll go all the way through to interviewee B, interviewee C, interviewee D, and so forth. So you'll have quite a lot of numbers. Now the reason for doing it that way is so that each interviewee has an ongoing set of numbers, not a repeated set of numbers. In other words, the second interview doesn't also start from 1, because if you're trying to refer to a line in an interview, you might say, in lines 6 to 8, as per the thing on the screen here, the interviewee mentions working at a library. So you wouldn't need to use the entire quote, which is quite wordy and would use up your word count. You could just say between lines 6 and 8. And so if you've got continuous numbering, there is only one line 6 to 8, because each interviewee has the ongoing numbers rather than the same set of numbers repeated again and again and again. When you're putting in your interviews in the appendix, you might want to click and highlight all of the interviews and then click the line number. So that way it's only the interviews that are being numbered. The rest of your dissertation will not be numbered, will appear as normal. If I've not made that very clear, then get in touch with me and I'll explain it in a different way. If you're struggling to find where these functions are on your version of Word, or struggling to utilize them, get in touch with me through email or a phone call or what have you, and I'll explain that in more depth. But hopefully this is relatively straightforward and clear cut for people. Okay, so if you want to improve your grade, then when you're doing your research design section, you'll mention the fact that you've used interviews as a research method. And you can mention people who have suggested why interviews are a good thing or a bad thing. There's various people you can look into. For example, you've got cited there John Cresswell. So you could go and get his book or buy it, get it from the library. Much cheaper to get it from the library. I do realise that there are maybe issues by the time you're reading this with your accessing a college library, but you can go to any public library and potentially get this. Or you can get online copies and so on. So you're not completely limited or forced to go and buy stuff at top-notch prices from the bookshop. Two other names you might want to mention are Braun and Clark. You've got one of their books, so they've written tons and tons of things, so you don't have to use that particular version. You could use one of their other ones that they've written. They write lots of things together. But they talk about these 6 steps of thematic analysis, which includes things like reading it several times over, coding it, going back, rethinking, rejigging your codes, all of that, which is essentially what I'm telling you to do here, except I'm keeping it simple rather than going into the level of depth that Braun and Clark go into. But in your written up section of your dissertation, you might want to mention thematic analysis was used using the 6 steps as recommended by Braun and Clark, whichever date of their work you're going for, the 2019 or a different one of their publications. You don't have to go into any great level of detail about what those 6 steps are. Just say that you've used them, you've followed their recommendations. You can also, if you want to do some further research, because I can't tell you every single thing you should be putting into your research, some of this is down to yourself. Look at the arguments for and against interviews, whether your interviews were carried out face-to-face, whether your interviews were carried out over email or over Skype or by some other method. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the different styles of interview? Which one did you use, and how have you worked around the potential limitations and weaknesses of that particular style? So if we want, for example, to think about the strengths and limitations of thematic analysis, they're here. So the strengths are that you get some rich data, which means you find lots of information from people. At least you do if they're giving you decent answers to the questions and not just one word, kind of moody, grunted answers. It's good for developing concepts and theories, so you can work out lots of ideas, lots of theories from interview data by coding it and then thematically analysing it. If any of you are using grounded theory light, so that this particularly applies more to the students using a sociological form of dissertation than those using psychological or ethics dissertations. In which case, if you're using grounded theory light, you already know that you're using it, so it doesn't need me to explain it in any more depth than that. Then this style of approach is particularly good for grounded theory light. It's applicable to research questions that go beyond the researcher's own experience. In other words, you can interview people whose life experience is very different from your own, and by applying thematic analysis you can get real insight into their life experience and come to understandings and insights that you wouldn't be able to get if you were just thinking in terms of your own life experience. And if you've interviewed 2, 3, 4, 5 people, then this bit about going beyond any single interviewee is that you're not only looking at something that applies to one person because you've only interviewed one person, you're picking out themes and patterns that repeat across a whole set of interviews, and therefore those themes apply to all, or at least most, of the people you've interviewed rather than only one of the people that you've interviewed. Limitations-wise, as with any qualitative research, it's very easy to end up seeing exactly what you want to see and believing exactly what you want to believe. And there is always that danger that you might start to imagine stuff that's not there. A counterpoint to that is triangulation, but we'll mention that on another screen as we go along, or another slide rather, as we go along. The counterpoint to this bit about there being patterns between several interviewees, there might be some really interesting feature that's only cropping up in one person's interview, but you're so busy looking at patterns across the interviews you could miss that really interesting thing that's in only one interview. So that's another issue you've got to be conscious of. Now, once you've done the numbering, and that's another example down there at the bottom of the screen of numbered transcripts, you read through them a couple of times, you and you think about it, and then you can get out the coloured crayons or the highlighter pens, whichever way you're going to do it. If you prefer to do it the old-fashioned way by hand, and then maybe do a neater version using computer technology, you start to think, well, what kinds of themes, what kinds of ideas crop up a lot in these interview transcripts? And you've got a couple of examples there, just random things I've made up as I went along. For example, anger and irritation crops up a lot in this little mini interview, and so you might decide you're going to highlight those words and phrases which reflect the anger or the irritation of the person you're talking to. And I've decided to highlight them in red. Could be any colour, there's no kind of mystical significance to the choice of colour here. So I've just gone through there and I've highlighted the bits to do with anger in red. There's also elements of regret in this, where the person is regretting having done stuff, so I've opted to highlight that in blue, and you can see there on the screen a bit highlighted in blue, and likewise several references to family stuff, wives, mother-in-laws, etc., so that I've highlighted in purple. And you can have as many colours as are available on your setup. You can do what I've done here of using font colour, highlighting different font colour. That's the way I'd recommend to do it, because that way you'll get a lot wider range of colours and the text remains readable. There's another way you can do it, but the colours available in the other system of highlighter icon are often quite hard to read, and you've only got, I think it's about 9 different colours to choose from. So if you wanted more than 9 categories, then you would very rapidly run out of colour schemes, which is an issue. So that's essentially what coding is. You go through highlighting things in different colours. As long as you remember what each colour means, you're sorted. That's what you need to do. Oh, I should point out, it's possible that you might have a phrase or a line or what have you, in which you think actually this could apply to 2 different sets of colours, in which case you can do the text in one colour and then do an underline in the other colour to try to indicate that this is two themes, 2 codes going on here at the same time. Then you have to create a coding manual, which is that grid at the top of the screen there. So you have 3 columns. In one column you state what the colours were. In this central column you state what each of those colours means or signifies. And then in the third and final column you state the frequency. So when you've finished all of your coding for all of the interviews, you go through it and you count up how many times have I highlighted in red? 7. How many times have I highlighted in blue? 13. And so on. The implication of the frequency column, which is about as close as we get to number crunching in this style of analysis, is usually that the more often something has been mentioned, presumably the more important it is to the people you're interviewing, and the less often something has been mentioned, by extension, probably the less important it is to the people you're interviewing. That is probably. So you just kind of use that as a vague guideline. Now, once you've got your colours set up, and in this case there's just 4 of them, you could have as many numbers as you want. Really, you can have 20 different codes if you really want to, but there's 4 here. When you get on to writing up your findings, your analysis section, you can use those codes as subheadings, as a way of organising the information. So you could have a section in which you explore issues of anger and irritation, and you start to relate theory to that. Another section in which you explore issues of regret over the past, and you relate maybe a different set of theories to that. So this gives you a structure and a shape and a format to how you lay out that exploratory discussion section of your dissertation, where you're trying to explain what these interviews signify, what they all mean. If it's a short little table like the one on the screen here, you can include that as part of your findings, cut and paste it into your findings. If you've got a really big chunky table, you might want to put that instead into the appendix, and then in the findings section you just say, well, see table on page whatever of the appendix. Do it that way. Okay, if you are using a sociological or a psychological approach for your dissertation, so this doesn't really apply to those students who are doing ethics, but for the psychologists and the sociologists, you might have lots and lots of codes, and one thing you can do to start simplifying this a bit is to condense those codes into what's called categories. Now, a category is just an overarching description of how 2, 3, 4, however many codes are quite similar to each other and are starting to link to each other. So the example on the screen here, you've got green code for friendships, brown code for relatives, and the overarching category is social relationships, because friends and relatives, quite obviously, are part of social relationships. Now, if somewhere else you had a yellow code for work colleagues, but you weren't including that in the category of social relationships, which it easily could be, then you would have to explain in your dissertation why not. Why have you decided to put it somewhere else? And again, rather than, let's say you've got loads and loads and loads of codes, too many codes to fit into your discussion section, you could instead use the categories as the sort of subheadings by which to structure your write-up and your explanation, where you squeeze in a lot of information very briefly about each of the codes in the category, but you're mainly focusing on the category and the theories that relate to the category. If you've got a small set of codes, let's say 4 or 5 codes, you don't realistically need categories as such. It's only when you've got a big set of codes, perhaps, for example, because you've done a lot of interviews, or the interviews you have done are really, really long. And so there's a lot of information to try and squeeze in there. That's when it becomes useful to include categories. So for those students writing ethics dissertations, this particular slide is not desperately relevant to you. Now, some things you might want to think about briefly, whether you're sociologists, psychologists, or ethics students, is the concept of Verstehen, which is a German notion developed by Max Weber. It's just the German word for understanding, but he applies it in sociology, and by extension it applies across to other forms of social science that can be studied. So Max Weber said Verstehen is the need to try and get into the shoes, or into the mind if you prefer, of the people you're interviewing, to really understand what their life is like from their point of view, to not only have a vague intellectual understanding of it, but a more kind of an emotional grasp of what it is like to be that person. And this you do for the interview, and rereading the interview and developing the ideas out of the interview. You're really trying to get into the mind of the interviewee. You're not trying to judge them. So you're not saying whether their view of the world is right or wrong. You're just saying this is what it is. This is what it is like to be this kind of a person, and to have these kinds of life experiences. These are the reasons why this person does what they do. These are the kind of driving motivations behind them. You're really trying to get inside them. If you just have a kind of a vague intellectual understanding, in other words, you've read it, you get what they're on about, but you don't, not emotionally, you're not kind of in tune with them, you just got a sort of surface level understanding. That's more what he described as Verstand, to have that kind of surface level understanding rather than Verstehen, that much deeper level of understanding. Another sociologist, Jörg Simmel, said that part of this is trying to understand people on their terms. So understand the world as they would see it, not as you, the researcher, would see it. So to give you an example, imagine that you're an atheist and you're going to conduct a study with a very devout Christian who goes to a Pentecostal church where they believe in demonic possession. And they're talking to you in the interview about having witnessed an exorcism of somebody in the church who was possessed by a demon. Now, if you are coming at it from Verstand, just an intellectual surface level, you could start to talk about, because you're an atheist, you don't believe in demons, you don't believe in gods, you could say, well, clearly this isn't really a demon, this is perhaps just a mental illness, or it's someone with an addiction and it's being classed as a demon, but it's not really a demon. You could start to apply theories and ideas in which you are describing that person's life experience, but from your point of view. For Simmel, you would accept that this person believes it is a demon. Whether you believe it's a demon or not is kind of besides the point. So this person believes it's a demon, therefore their actions in attending the church and all the other people there who also believe it's a demon and conduct this exorcism and engage in various activities, this is why they do it. This is the understanding they have. So you're trying to get, not to agree with them, you're just trying to understand why they view the world as they view it, not put on top of them a point of view or a set of theories that would kind of dismiss them because you don't agree with them. So for Simmel, it's not about agreeing, it's just about trying to see the world entirely from their point of view, at least as much as you can. And not everyone agrees that that is possible. So Dilthey, going all the way back to the 1800s there, he argues that it's often very difficult, sometimes nigh on impossible, to truly understand another person's point of view. But also adds a level that if you're interviewing someone, you ask them the question about themselves and their life, it's not wise, Dilthey says, to automatically assume you're going to get a full or honest answer, because many people themselves do not know their own lives terribly well, or their own motivations. We're too busy living our life to sit and think deep, profound philosophical thoughts about ourselves, about why we do stuff. And certainly some of you listen to this may have had occasions in your own life when you've done something and you've suddenly had paused and thought, why on earth did I just do that? And you've got no idea yourself why you've just done something. In my case, it's opening the fridge and finding there's a phone in there and thinking, why the hell did I put a phone in the fridge? I've no idea why I did that. I don't even remember doing it, but it's there. And if somebody asked me and said, well, why did you do that? I would have no idea. But would I be honest enough to say to the interviewer, I really have no idea why I do half the things I do? Or would I try to make up some vaguely plausible sounding response in order to look slightly less stupid and clueless about myself? And Dorothy's argument is that frequently if you put somebody on the spot and ask them a question, they'll just make up an answer there and then, which may not be the real reason why they did something, because perhaps they don't even know themselves why they did something that you're asking them about. Others have said, yes, that's a fair point. However, even the lie that's made up can be revealing, can be interesting, can be worth studying. And here is an issue in any kind of interview. You're possibly not going to get completely honest answers from people. Depends what sort of questions you ask them. But do you, as the interviewer, run with the answer? Do you just assume this is honest, even if privately you're thinking they probably are not terribly honest about what they're saying? From a Verstehen point of view, you kind of got to go with it, even if secretly you think it's maybe not as honest as it could be. Do you make an effort to double check? So if this person says they have 3 children, do you look up the electoral roll to double check that they really do have 3 children? Or do you just take it on face value that if they say they've got 3 kids, then they've got 3 kids? That's a judgment call you have to make. And something you have to mention in the write-up, how honest are these people liable to be? Well, are you taking their answers on face value, or are you taking a slightly more, perhaps jaded, maybe that's too strong a word, but a slightly more cynical point of view, where you are questioning the honesty or the veracity of their answers? Then you factor that into your write-up. So if, for example, you think maybe the person is being a bit cagey because they're nervous about saying the wrong thing, or they're worried about who's going to read their answers and might not like their answers, let's say they're talking about work and they're worried the boss might find out what they've said, that could make them very cagey and give incomplete or half-truth answers. So you might want to mention that in your write-up. Frequency codes probably won't apply to people studying ethics, possibly sociology, psychology, depending on the nature of what you're doing. So I'll just mention these in case you need to know about it, but it's quite possible that you might not. A frequency code is where you're looking usually at a set of interviews or a set of documents, like newspapers, for example, and you're counting how often certain things are mentioned. So you're not going into any great depth about it, you're just interested in how often certain topics crop up in a set of discussions, and you're keeping track of the numbers of times things appear. So you create, as part of it, a coding schedule and a coding manual. Slightly different type of coding manual to the one previously mentioned. So this, for example, let's say you're looking at a set of newspapers and you're interested in knowing what kind of celebrity scandals are mentioned in a week's worth of newspapers. So you create a set of a table at the top with a set of categories, and in one column you've got the newspapers that you looked at, the second column a description of the scandal, third column the gender of the celebrity, then the race of the celebrity, and then the type of celebrity, in other words, what they're famous for. So you've just got a set of numbers, and somebody coming along reading that wouldn't have a clue what those numbers meant. So you then add in a coding manual where you explain on the bottom half of the screen what that set of numbers means. So, for example, if we take the top line of the coding schedule, we can see 1A 2111. So that means, going down, the newspaper column 1A is the Sun. So that the researchers read the Sun. And the scandal is number 2, which on the scandal column is drug addiction. And the gender of the celebrity is number 1, female, the race of the celebrity, number 1, white, British, type of celebrity, number 1, pop star. So we'd know from the top line that the Sun newspaper carried a scandal about an adultery committed by a white British female pop star. And likewise in the second line, 1B 5232. So 1B, we look down, the Mirror. Number 5, well, it's not included on this scandal, but let's say number 5 is murder, for argument's sake. Number 2, it's a male celebrity. Number 3, they're an Asian male celebrity. Number 2, they're an actor. So the Mirror carries a story about an Asian male actor who either has committed a murder or been a victim of a murder or a witness to a murder or whatever, but somehow there's been a scandal involving a murder. So that's how you keep track of that, so that the reader can look at your first table, see all those numbers, and then look down at the second table and work out what those numbers mean, what they represent. So that's only useful if you're doing the kind of research where you are tallying up how often certain types of events or issues are mentioned in either a set of interviews or a set of documents like newspapers or books or whatever it might be that you're looking at. Right, so this is the point where if we were all sitting in a classroom together, I'd get you to sit down with a set of coloured pens and go through your interviews and highlight them, but you can do that at home. Start coding your interviews. One issue I mentioned very briefly earlier, which we'll come back to here just at the end, is triangulation. Now, triangulation is a way to get around this issue in qualitative research, particularly things like thematic analysis, where it's very easy to end up seeing exactly what you want to see rather than necessarily what is there, because your own biases and prejudices influence you to look in one direction rather than another. So triangulation is when you get a second or a third person to sit down and read your codes and say, yeah, I think you're right, or they could say, well, I think you're barking up the wrong tree and you've missed this and you've missed that, and I don't agree with this. And then you have a chat and you work out a kind of a way forward in which you reflect on what they've said to you, and either you go along with what they've said or you stick to your guns and stay with the original version you had. So who you triangulate with, well, that could be your supervisor. And normally the first port of call is your supervisor. You show them your coding and they go, yeah, fair enough. Or they go, well, I don't know, I think you might be making a few mistakes there. You could also show your work to, well, in the normal run of things, it could be a fellow student if we weren't all being confined to barracks at the moment. So it could be someone you live with, husband, wife, grown-up child, the cat, whoever, that you show your stuff to, and they kind of think, well, even if they don't know much about ethics or sociology or psychology, they could say, well, yeah, I can see what you mean. They do mention this thing a lot that you've coded in blue. Or they could say, well, what about that thing that you haven't coded at all? They also mention that thing a lot. Why haven't you coded that? So somebody you show your work to who can just cast an eye over it before you're typing up your interpretation, so that you're not wasting time typing up something that you later come to think is maybe mistaken. So we can do that by email, so you can do your coding at home, you can email it into me or whoever your supervisor is, and they can have a read through it and say whether they agree with your coding or not, before you then start typing up your explanation of what those codes mean in any great detail or depth. So that pretty much brings us to the end of